A lot of our listeners are wondering about loan type, structuring for growth and avoiding some of the biggest finance mistakes. What money do you need set aside to actually buy an investment, cover your stamp duty, etc.? Is there a minimum? Do we even need a deposit? Are there other ways to buy without having money?
Yeah, good question. A lot of people can enter the market and it comes down to whether you've got, I think the average loan is 22 years for a home loan in Australia. This ongoing pressure that builds up, so it's not just the amount or the dollar or the payment, it's that mental side of it that's really, really big as well. If you've got the cash flows to afford it, you can make little inroads with your debt to get that down. You turn around 6 years later, you've got so much more equity than you thought you had. So the way offset accounts work, if you've got a loan of say 500 grand and you build the offset to 100, it believes the 100's in the loan, so you only pay interest on 400. So if you end up with a loan of 450 and 450 in the offset account, you actually pay zero interest.
What's the general rule of thumb when it comes to borrowing capacity?
I think the Royal Commission got this completely wrong.
Welcome back to the No B.S.Property Investing Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about what it really means to be prepared before you borrow, not just getting a loan approved, but structuring it properly so it works for your future. I'll be throwing to Mark some questions today, and I know a lot of our listeners are wondering about when it comes to loan type, structuring for growth and avoiding some of the biggest finance mistakes. Now, Mark, the plane flying over your head's just gone now, so we can get into today's podcast.
Yeah, got a bit of a flight path issue in Hamilton in Brisbane there.
Yeah, no, I might not have passed the Ripehouse due diligence checks for air traffic noise, but we got there. So I'm going to start off with some pretty simple questions, but I'm sure you from the lending side and even from the strategy side with our clients, you'd have gotten these questions thousands and thousands of times, but it's obviously we ask these questions a lot because people really want to know these answers. So we'll start off with some really basic stuff here. So firstly, getting into, I guess, the different loan types in terms of, what's the key differences between principal and interest only, and when should someone actually choose one over the other?
As far as principal and interest only, look, I'm a big believer, Julian, of clients reducing debt and getting into a position and not just relying on capital growth on the asset, it's actually getting the debt down. So the debt's actually going down and the asset's growing. So when people can afford making principal payments, I'm actually really big on that. But the actual correct answer is basically for investment when you've got non-deductible debt. Investment debt should be interest only. And the reason behind that is you can get better gearing benefits from it. And the rate's slightly higher, but you can get better gearing benefits and the gearing benefits stay longer. So what I'm saying there is as the investment debt goes down, with principal payments, you might be paying $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 per year off that loan. And what that does actually effectively reduces your tax refunds through negative gearing. So effectively you lose some gearing, but I actually think it's outweighed by reducing debt and losing that little bit of tax if you've got the cash flows to afford it. So what I principally do with all our customers at ALRC, if you can afford it and you've got cash flows and you can make little inroads with your debt to get that down, getting this action happening is very beneficial. You turn around 6 years later and you realise that you've got so much more equity than you thought you had, as opposed to the ones where if the markets don't, and hopefully we don't buy assets that don't grow, but if it doesn't grow and the asset just stays even, the client could turn around in 5 years' time, such as like the Melbourne market the last 4 years or the apartment market in Melbourne for the last 15 years, and without debt reduction and without growth, it actually does nothing for a long period of time, which I try to basically stay away from.
Yeah. And is there sometimes, I say for clients in general, it's interest only, but it's not just that simple, right? There's sometimes, and probably maybe in prior years, and you'd understand the loan products far better than I would, is there sometimes some exceptions where you go, well, generally it's interest only, but sometimes the lenders might have a crazy lower rate on the P&I where it's just like, guys, for an extra $20 or $50 a week, why wouldn't you go P&I? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. Look, it's probably 15 basis points to 20 basis points, the difference between the two at most institutions. Okay, so they charge a little bit more for interest only. So it can be worth it, but again, we can even structure the loan that we lend you more money on the investment to cover that principal payment if you've got equity and you're well below 80% ratio. We can actually lend you the money to have extra in the offset account to cover P&I payments where you're actually using the bank's money. So there's ways to structure it to get that lower rate if people are really shopping for that lower rate. But if it's 0.15%, it's minuscule. I think it's more around the cash flow. I think it's more about the buffers. I think it's more about the head space. And also the final thing I want to touch on is the non-deductible debt. If it's large and $1 million and it's a long road to clear that, let's go interest only on the investments to really put a big effort into clearing the non-deductible debt. because that we know that's the one that puts the noose around people's around the necks of families. And it's not just the loan being high and the payment being high, Julian. It's about this ongoing pressure that goes 25, 30 years. I think the average loan is 22 years for a home loan in Australia. It's this this ongoing pressure that builds up. So it's not just the amount or the dollar or the payment. It's that mental side of it that's really, really big as well.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And then I guess touching on to the next part of the loan types, fixed versus variable rates. Can you maybe break down the pros and cons of each and maybe, in which situation you lean one towards the other?
Yeah, I can, Julian. Well, fixed was really, really big about 3 or 4 years ago when rates were low, just to lock that away. And the people that did lock that away for a period of time have really won. I've got some fixed coming off now with 5-year fixed and 4-year fixed, and they've really, really cashed in. But in the last, say, 2 years, since rates have gone up quite a bit, they went up 18 times or equivalent, 14 times, but equivalent to 18.25s. No one's fixed, okay? And the rates are supposed to still be coming down. It's slower than what we thought, and there may be still some further drops. But I don't see fixed being something that people will go after just yet. But in saying that, it comes down to the individual. So it comes down to their cash flow position, their risk profile, how they sleep at night, their comfort level. And if they need that to feel better and know their payment's set for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, etc., then sometimes it's an option. But in the last 2 years, very rare because rates have been coming down. But it's definitely something that we should be looking at, and will probably come up again in the next 6 to 12 months a lot more than it has been in the last 2 years.
And I guess kind of branching off on that topic, is that because I was one of those people who had some fixed rates and some loans, and that was great while it lasted, but obviously, back then, the fixed rate market was really competitive. You had some great cashback incentives as well. Potentially, lenders, whilst rates were rising, didn't really have the confidence to give great fixed rate products. Do you kind of see that probably changing, where we maybe get to the high 4s? Or I think there's some early 5s out there already. Like, do you see that? Obviously, most people are on variable right now. The banks are probably concerned from a retention side of things. They're going to have to give some good fixed products as well to try and for a retention piece. Is that pretty, cyclical that comes through?
Yeah, well, the banks locked a lot of people away that way. That's how they got people to sit there 3, 4, 5 years. So when you have rebates going on, Julian, what happens there is that everybody's looking for a rebate. So you see some customers moving every 12 months or 18 months to pick up a rebate, which is not ideal from the bank's position because it's not on their balance sheet for long enough for them to make money if they're paying commissions out to a broker. So you'll find a lot of banks offered great rates to lock people away to secure the deal. And do I see that happening again? Yeah, I do at some stage when it nearly bottoms out. And but fixed, there is a place for fixed, definitely. A lot of people made a lot of money on fixed, but the problem that we had is that all those people fixed in at 2.5%. I think we got down to 1.69. I think was the last I saw. Yes, what's happened there is a lot of people have gone fixed, okay, and they at one point, I think the lowest I saw was 1.69%. And then what happened? The issue is when rates go up 18 times, equivalent to 18.25%, they come off at 5%. So there was this massive rate payment change of probably up to 3 times. And it's really hurt a lot of people. So people have been burnt from that. And I think the day they see they can get some comfort, that's locked away to get that 3 to 5 year payment amount, I think more people will take that up more than previously because of the past experience of being burnt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the average person out there is pretty risk averse. They'd rather the security, right? So I think when we start getting some high 4s, mid 4s, hopefully that's not too far away. I think we'll see a lot more people.
And on that, Julian, I'll just add that if you can get that running cost down to 1%, okay, so I'm talking about net running cost after costings, negative gearing, refunds, depreciation, all those types of things. If you're buying an asset for 500K and we get it down to $5,000, which is kind of where it is now, for a yield asset around 4.5% gross yield, the running cost at 1%, if you are holding it for 5 years at 5% and the gain on that asset is 35 to 55%, it's starting to become very beneficial to the client to do this. And if you can lock that away and know it's only 1% cost for the next 5 years, then why wouldn't you do it?
Great. And I guess now offset accounts get mentioned a lot, but not everybody understands them clearly. So what exactly are they and when do they really make sense to use?
So 99.9% of our clients at ALRC will have offset accounts, Julian, because it's vital to bring that interest down. So any money you've got sitting in an offset account is going to bring your interest payment down. So If you've got $500 sitting in a different account elsewhere, bring it in and put it in the offset account, which will bring your interest down, which effectively means you pay more principal off for that loan. Okay, so the way offset accounts work, the best way of explaining it, if you've got a loan of say 500 grand and you've got an offset account with 50 grand, the computer believes that 50 grand is in the loan. So if the loan's 500 and the offset's 50, it believes the loan balance is 450. So it believes this 50 is in the loan. So if you build the offset to 100, it believes the 100's in the loan. So you only pay interest on 400. So anything in that offset account comes off the balance of the loan. That's the best way of explaining it. So if you end up with a loan of 450 and 450 in the offset account, you actually pay zero interest. So we'll do that with a lot of investor clients who want to release equity. They'll do a loan for 100K, put it in the offset account and make no payments on that loan under an interest-only structure until such time they start drawing the offset funds.
Yeah, so that's what you kind of refer to using the offset as almost like a cash buffer there, right? Is that what you're kind of alluding to there?
Absolutely. So it could be for an equity release, for investment. It could be a cash buffer to sleep at night. And all of us have a sleep at night number, okay, that we need. So I've got clients who have 4 million worth of debt and can live on 10 grand. I can't do that. If I carry, I think my debt level is 10 or 11 million dollars, I need 300,000 or 400,000 sitting around as my comfort level, just so I can get through any kind of issues that come up. That's what I need to minimize risk in my mindset. And everyone's different, but the buffer in the offset account is critical. And the higher the debt you've got, the bigger the buffer should be in most cases, unless you are one of those people that are very, very organized in regard to transactions and how you run your budgets and understand all your spending. I see the very odd person can live on very low balances and sleep at night like a baby. So it does vary, but offset is the most critical product out there, and I don't believe in anyone setting up a loan without an offset account. And the other one I wanted to touch on is a lot of people will set up a loan with a redraw, okay, and no offset account. Now, if you turn that to an investment property, so I'll just explain redraw quickly. A redraw is a loan, so say you've got a loan of 450 and you pay it down by 10 grand, or you have to pay it by 10 grand over a certain period of time, but you pay it down by 30. So it's gone down by 30. You only have to pay it by 10, so you're 20K ahead. So your redraw is 20K, that you take that 20 back out when you want. The thing I don't like about redraw, and this is what people don't understand and branches and banks don't understand, is if you turn that property to an investment property at some stage and you've paid that debt down and take it back up, when you take it back up, you can't claim the interest on that increase. Because when you took it up, the purpose of those funds to take it up might have been to go on a holiday, it might have been to buy a car, and that's not purpose-driven for the investment, it's for the holiday. And where people get caught out is they tell their accountant, I've turned it to an investment property, I now owe 470, but really it was down to, we'll say 420, I owe 450. It was really down to 420, so you can only claim the interest on 420. So that's where people get it wrong with redraws, which is why I don't like them. So I'll use an offset account 99% of the time before a redraw.
You beat me to my next question I had here, so you're all on top of it. And I guess the next question, obviously, is there a rule of thumb in terms of understanding borrowing capacity before someone even speaks to a lender? Is there like a multiplier? Like, what's the general rule of thumb when it comes to borrowing capacity?
I'm a little different, Julian. I don't believe in borrowing capacities. I don't believe in giving a customer a borrowing capacity and say you can go and spend 900,000. I think the Royal Commission got this completely wrong. They've allowed banks and brokers to give these numbers out there, and what it does effectively, it sets people up to be able to do things they probably shouldn't do. So customers should be doing things subject to their risk profile, their comfort level, their buffers, the strategy, their debt levels, their retirement age. There's so many different things that should be taken into account, not a bank or a broker saying you've got capacity of 900,000. Okay. So in my meetings, Julian, I won't even talk about borrowing capacity, very rarely, because it's irrelevant. Okay. A good broker should be lending on the personal circumstances, not around a computer giving a rate or a number of what you can lend to. I'm not massively big on borrowing capacity, but it's interesting. We all need to know, but I don't think we should be lending on that point.
Yeah, and I'm a big advocate of that as well. Like I see this pop open on some social feeds where someone will be talking about their first home buyer couple just used their borrowing capacity. They had a $2 million borrowing capacity. They go out there and they buy their $2 million house, first home buyer 95%. And I think a lot of people out there don't, and they're not very financially literate. So they're maybe getting back from the broker that it's, $10K or $15K a month for their repayments. A lot of people aren't thinking, well, oh, bugger, that's with actually my after-tax income, right? So they're just like, well, I make 200 or 300 grand a year, so what's 20K out of that 300? It's nothing. But it's like, no. It could be nearly double that if you're at the top tax rate, right? And I think that's the big issue, that you give somebody just their blanket borrowing capacity. That's just, well, now I've got this money in my wallet, I can just go spend it. But it's whether you can afford it. And I really like that you touched on that.
Well, you're right, Julian. That's your net income. So if you gross that out, so say a lot of Sydney people are in this position with massive non-deductible home loan debt. So say your payment's 10 grand a month, that's 120 net. You gross that out, that's on someone on the highest tax bracket, that's about, 225 gross. Imagine paying 225 off your home loan with a noose around your neck for 22 years. That's a pressure that I wouldn't like on my family, and we try and avoid that with most of our customers.
Absolutely. Now, the next question, obviously, everybody wants to know, what does it actually take in terms of what money do you need set aside to actually buy an investment, cover your stamp duty, etc.? Is there a dollar figure in mind? Obviously, it's going to scale to the price of the property, but is there a minimum? Do we even need a deposit? Like, are there other ways to buy without having money? Like, what would you say the minimum is, or some ways you can go about it if you don't maybe have the cash immediately?
Yeah.
If you're serious about building wealth through property, you don't just need a loan, you need a strategy. And that's exactly what the Australian Lending and Investment Centre delivers. Australia's most awarded brokerage. They're not just looking at what you can borrow, they'll build you a holistic lending plan tailored to your long-term goals. We use them, we trust them, and so do our clients. So to find out more or to book your complimentary lending strategy session, head to the link in the show notes to connect with the team. Thanks for listening. Now back to the video.
Good question. A lot of people can enter the market, and it comes down to whether you've got a guarantor or haven't got a guarantor. So there's two answers to this. Okay, so without a guarantor and doing it yourself, it's harder to get into the market than someone with a guarantor. So you need around $80,000 to $90,000 to get into the market. So most banks will lend 88% plus insurance for an investment property. So say you're buying a property for $450K at 88%, what's that come to? What's that 10 of 45, which is for about $410. So you need a deposit of about 42, 43 grand, and then you need you need a deposit of about 51, 52. Then you need your stamp duty, your conveyancing costs, if you're using a buyer's advocate, you need that fee as well. So it comes to around 85 to 90K to get into the market, and that's to get into the market around the 400 to 480 mark. Now, with a guarantor, there's institutions out there that will lend to you with only a small deposit of 10 to 20 grand. But the parents offer their property security as a guarantor. They guarantee a certain amount. So you put in 20 grand, and the parents guarantee, so say 450 at 80%, 360, that's 90K. The cost to buy is 40, that's 130. You put in 20, so they guarantee 110. Just in a quick calculation. So the parents would offer their property security for the 110. The applicant would put their 20K in. The 110 is secured by their property. The rest of the loan at 360 is secured by the purchase property. And anyone out there who've got parents who can assist should take advantage of entering the market earlier, because a running cost of say $5,000 to run a property post-tax at interest only, and they've only got 20K, if they've got parents who are supporting, they can actually get into the market.
And you can touch on this a bit further. I think sometimes people are thinking they want to go buy a property by themselves, right? They want it to have full ownership. If you go guarantor, they don't have to stay guarantor forever, right?
Absolutely. So it gets released. So if that 100, say the property grows and we buy it for 450 and it grows to 550. If the debt's under 440, which is 80% of 550, then we can release the parent's property straight away. But one thing I really push with my customers who go guarantor is go guarantor for the second property. The reason being is going guarantor avoids paying insurance, so there's a big savings there. But if you take the guarantor away for the second purchase, the insurance is paid on all loans again, so you don't really save them money. So for the people that want to go guarantor, I encourage them to be there for the second property. And once that valuation gets under 80%, we release the parent's property and their children are up and going. And basically running their investment portfolio at under 80% with two assets with, say, $1,000 worth of rent coming through at a cost of 10 grand. So I'm really big on the guarantor being there a little bit longer, but then releasing the parents. And the parents would normally get released within 24 to 48 months.
And I guess the big thing there is as well, might not take too long to get up to that 10, 20K mark in terms of savings, but the difference to get up to that $90,000 mark, we could be talking, years, right? And then all of a sudden that $450,000 property might be a $700,000 property. And then we're potentially going into a maybe a less desired location or a less desired type of dwelling, right? So it allows us to really fast track that investment journey.
Well, you look at Melbourne right now, how quickly that's moving in the last, say, 60 days with the auction numbers. So the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. But it's the biggest challenge, I've got to say. It's the biggest challenge for the young people out there in the market to get in there. But if you can get the parents to go guarantor and get them onto the phone to have a chat to their broker or their banker in regard to how they can help, so they can explain the risk to the parents. We've been dealing with guarantors, Julian, now. I have personally for probably, how old am I now? So I've been 30 years. I haven't seen a guarantor get into trouble in 30 years, okay? And there's ways to reduce that risk for the guarantor. So if it's explained properly, you'd be surprised on how many guarantors are very, very comfortable with the process.
I think the most important part for the guarantor, no different from if you're buying your personal name, is you're securing it with a good asset, right? Like if you're going out there buying a new off-the-plan apartment, well, that does maybe potentially put a little bit of risk on the guarantor. But if you're buying a freehold 3 or 4 bedroom family home, I would say nothing's ever 0% risk, right? But I would say you're at a very, very low risk. Now, Mark, obviously your time's very valuable, so we might power through some of these next questions here. Mm-hmm. So structuring, that's a really important part of buying a property, but also from the finance side of things. A lot of people just focus on getting their first property, but not much beyond that. What should borrowers keep in mind when they want to set themselves up for future purchases?
One of the biggest mistakes, Julian, that people make is they go to a bank or a branch and just get a loan, okay, where you should be talking strategically. You should be thinking ahead of the game and then set the loan structure up. So work backwards in a way. So if you're buying an asset today, what's that asset going to be there for later down the track? Is it going to become a rental? Is it a growth market? Is it going to work hard for you? What ownership does it need to be in? How do we re-gear the asset? How do we recycle the asset? So one of the biggest problems out there in regard to structure is people just go and buy a house and put it in 50-50. Okay, so they should be thinking about how they structure it. Okay, so they should be dealing with a broker or a banker who understands structure, gearing, tax, and obviously should be using an advocate to understand the market. So it could be an asset we buy today that's owner occupied, but we're going to move out in 4 years' time. We're going to turn it to a rental property. So how do we get that debt? As you turn it to an investment property, how do you get that debt high? What laws are in place for each state? How do we re-gear and debt recycle that to turn that to an investment, but not only just because you want that to be an investment to get tax deductions and to assist you running it, but to get the money out to own the next house. So that's probably one of the big things around structure, around ownership and getting that right. And people think, I'll do that later. I'll just go and shop a rate and get a loan and get a product. And what's the best rate out there, which is the biggest mistake you can make, because once you buy it, it's done. Okay, it's very hard to change it. It is changeable, but you have to be quite creative to be able to change the ownership to get it right, to turn it into a structure that you need to advance your position.
And I'll jump in there. Sometimes it's changeable, sometimes it's not though, right? Like well, it always is changeable. I guess you're right there, but it can come with really big costs, right? Like in terms of if you've not done the right ownership structure at the beginning, you then want to change it. You want to change from buying in joint tenants or over to tenants in common or to a company or a trust or something like that. That's great. You can do it. But if you like paying stamp duty again, which nobody does like doing that, right? So that's another cost. And then there can also be capital gains tax that you might be liable to pay. So you're right in terms of sometimes people just want to go the easiest path. They've had their Dolomite account with CBA. I'm just going to walk in there. The loan process will be super simple, but they're just going to give you the product that they have available for you right away. And they're not giving any two stuffs about what you want to do for purchase two, what your tax deductions are going to be, all of those kind of things. So,
there's nothing strategic coming from those operators. Yeah. So, and that's fine. There's a place for that as well, because people just want to loan the product and they want to shop it and they go to a barbecue and say, what's the lowest rate you've got? And they think that's fantastic. I don't think the value's there. The value's not even close to there. Now, if it's 0.1% on a 400K mortgage, it's $400 a year. If your broker or advisor can't make you $400 a year, you probably need to change advisors. Yeah. So it's more about, let's get the structure right. The values in the structure, the ownership, the gearing, the long-term goals, what are we going to do with the asset, the growth, the buy price, all those things. And that's where the buyer's advocate's massive for us, our business at ALRC, because most of our assets we're buying it to enable wealth. Okay. Yes, it could be emotional, but we're buying it to enable wealth. And we've already got a strategy in play in regard to how that's going to play out for the next 5, 6, 7 years on how the loan structure will work, how the tax will work, how the cash flow will work to get you to ultimately your end goal over here of having the smallest non-deductible debt on your dream house. So that's probably, structure-wise, that's probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah. I'm just going to enter in here, Mark. I'm just because I want to make sure we wrap up on a good time for this podcast. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. One, the first one I'm just going to ask is just about common traps or people make. And all I just probably want you to touch on here is they're upgrading their family home and they go, great, I'm just going to turn the family home into a rental and then I'm just going to go buy the new family home with full debt, just something like that, which dickhead mistake. And then the last thing I'll just ask you about, equity is a really powerful tool, but it can also be used. What's the right and the wrong ways to use it? It kind of ties into each other. And then we'll steam through this one and we'll get into the next one. Alrighty. And I guess, Mark, from your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that borrowers often, probably made the most common mistake or one of the most common mistakes people make without realising?
So, Julian, I kind of touched on a little bit before, but it's the one where you're buying a house and then a lot of people just say, look, it's going to be a good investment property. It receives good rent. It's a good market. The states, that area is about to move, such as Melbourne right now. And they go, we'll just turn it to an investment property. But there's no thought process around it.
And you're talking about their existing family home, right?
Yeah, so they turn that, they say, well, we'll keep that as an investment. We'll move up the road. So then they end up with this low home loan debt that turns to an investment, which stays investment because it's actually illegal to increase a debt on an asset without knowing how to do it and just topping up the debt, which a lot of banks and branches do. So they end up with this low home loan debt and a low investment debt because they move out and rent it out. And they end up with this really high home loan debt because they use the equity out of the house. So that's probably the biggest mistake that people make around just making that decision. Well, it's a good property. It would be a good rental. It gets good rent. Let's just keep it. Yeah.
And touching on that, so that's and what Mark's alluding to there for those who maybe aren't as financially savvy. You're saying somebody's got let's call it $1 million property. They had a $200,000 mortgage on it. So they then go, well, great, let's just leave that as a rental because it's just been so easy for us. We're in a great area. We're going to go buy the new flashy home up the road, it's worth $1.5 million. We're not going to put any deposit down because we don't have it. It's just all used as equity. So you pay an extra 5% of your buying costs. So you're basically over 1.6, 1.65, somewhere around that mark for that new investment, or not new investment, new home. But then you've got the old home down the road, which, by the way, if you happen to sell it, there's no capital gains tax, but you're only going to be having about $200,000 of a loan to deduct on, right? So, and then you've been stuck with this home, 1.6 or so in debt, and it's all non-deductible debt, right? Because it's home loan debt. Is that pretty much the most summary way?
Yeah, spot on. And you can only allowed to have one PPR, not that we're accountants, but you're only allowed, and we have to understand it to be good investment lenders. But you can only have one PPR, so you've got to nominate, and not straight away you have to nominate. So you can only have one PPR. So the one you move out of, you can keep that as your PPR, even though you don't live there, and you move over here. So gains on the one you move into, you pay CGT. So you choose the one you're going to call your PPR by the one that goes up the most. And the ATO are pretty nice there. They let the customer make the decision later, which is quite interesting. So you can kind of see which one goes up the most. But the problem there is like a $200K debt on that $2 million. So say rates are 5%. At $200K, you got $10,000 worth of interest, running costs of say $8-9 grand. Call it now it's $19K, but your rent's $1,500, which is like $76,000 against 19. So you're paying tax on 57 less depreciation. So then you're paying a tax bill at 45 cents on 57, which is about $25,000 a year on that asset. Now that doesn't work. So straight away, that's a no-no, that structure you mentioned there. And then you've got this big non-deductible debt, Julian, you mentioned that's coming out of your net income at 1.6 of debt, out of your post-tax money at say it's 5%, interest at 1.6, a mil at 5%, so what's that, 80,000 P&Is, 94,000, 94 grossed out, it's 160,000 coming out of your gross salary for 22 years, say on average, which it just doesn't work.
No, absolutely. I think it's just this, we have a bit of a mindset in Australia where we don't want to lose that property because we're going to pay tax. We're worried about the tax man, but again, we're not going to on the family home, or we're going to really sell it to the agent. It's to the agent fees, really. So it's a big one. And probably the last question I'll get into here for today, Mark, and it's been a ripper of an episode. Equity is obviously a really powerful tool, but it also can be misused. What's the right way and the wrong way to be using to tap into your equity?
So to tap in is obviously, you can only tap in if you know what your valuation is and that you've got equity there. Okay, so some banks will lend to 90% with equity release. Some banks will go to 80%. 90% is obviously, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer or a profession where you can get waiver, you can go to 90. But for the majority of us, it's 80%. So the right way is getting the highest valuation you can. Okay, and then realising that equity and then getting that equity release out. Another good way of doing it is, so one is through valuation. The other one is releasing equity and borrowing more money. You can use multiple institutions. Okay, so you can borrow more money by maximising your borrowing power through an institution by getting the cash out like up to 80% and then using those funds to that equity release to actually buy and leverage into something else. That's a really good way of utilising equity release.
And what you're touching on there, that's basically, you get an equity release with one lender. It might not be able to give you all the borrowing that you need for that secondary purchase, or maybe not a rate, whatever it is. Won't go too much into detail, but then going, well, technically here's my equity release, which is going to act as my deposit and buying costs, and then going to the other lender who's potentially got a better product or a better amount of loan or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, well, valuations are done very differently now. So there's panel valuers and there's computer valuations. So a lot of the cases, the computer valuations are reasonable. So if you can find an institution that uses computer valuations to get the higher number to release the cash out, that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is extending loan terms. So you can get the valuation, that's one thing. But if you extend the loan terms, it effectively brings down your servicing payments that the banks use, down, which allows you to borrow more money, which allows you to get more cash out. So extending loan terms is another good way of doing it. Now, through the Royal Commission, they weren't that comfortable with that. The regulators weren't that comfortable with it because what it does, it extends the loan term, which effectively allows the banks to have the loan for longer on their books to make more money. Okay, but if it's documented as to why and what we're doing and it's not necessarily a means for the bank to make more money, then it's fine. Okay. And I do push that a lot with our customers. We'll blow out loan terms to increase borrowing capacity, but we do make it very, very clear that it's not a 30-year loan term. The asset's probably going to be held for 4 to 7 years, depending on the market and the advice from the advocate. So we can get out of it at any time. It's just a 30-year assessment by the bank.
Awesome. Well, Mark, that was a cracker of information you passed on to the listeners today, and hopefully it gives our listeners a clear idea of what it means to be finance ready, not just chasing the biggest loan, but making smart choices that set them up for the long term. So guys, that's a wrap for episode 7, being finance ready. If you found this helpful, share it with someone who's preparing to buy. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode, and we'll catch you for episode 8. Go see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you want to see some high-performing suburbs, then grab our free Suburb Performance Report below. It's packed with data we use every day to guide our clients.